Hey there, amazing friends. Welcome to our channel, where we share stories that touch your heart and inspire your soul. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our incredible community. We'd love to have you with us. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We're so excited to hear from every corner of the world. Now get ready for a story that will leave you inspired and uplifted. The diner was a quiet haven in the middle of the bustling small town, its neon sign glowing softly against the dim evening sky. Inside, the warm hum of conversation mixed with the clink of silverware and the low murmur of the jukebox playing a nostalgic tune. A few patrons sat scattered across the booths, sipping coffee or sharing meals under the dim glow of overhead lights. The scent of fresh pie wafted through the air, giving the place a cozy charm. Emily moved gracefully between the tables, her practiced smile greeting each customer as though they were her only concern. In her late 20s, she wore the tired yet determined expression of someone juggling too much but refusing to falter. Her apron pocket bulged slightly with bills and receipts, the tools of her trade. As she refilled a coffee cup for an elderly couple sharing a slice of pie, her cheerful "enjoy your evening" sounded genuine, even though her thoughts were elsewhere. Her sick child at home, the unpaid bills piling on her kitchen counter, and the long hours still ahead. The bell above the door jingled softly, drawing Emily's attention. A young man stepped in, dressed simply in jeans and a hoodie. His tall frame and composed demeanor made him stand out, but he moved quietly, scanning the room before choosing a booth in the corner. Emily grabbed her notepad and approached with her usual warm smile. "Good evening," she greeted him, pen poised. "What can I get started for you?" He glanced up, meeting her gaze with a polite smile of his own. "Just a coffee to start, please, and maybe the special?" "Coming right up," Emily replied, jotting down the order. But as she walked away, she noticed something about his smile. It wasn't just polite. It was thoughtful, as if he'd noticed more than just the menu. She brushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of her work. From his booth, Barron Trump observed the scene with quiet interest. Traveling alone for a few days, he had stumbled upon the diner by chance, drawn in by its inviting glow. As he waited for his coffee, he couldn't help but notice Emily's interactions with the other patrons. She listened patiently to the elderly couple's stories, reassured a mother struggling to calm her toddler, and even shared a quick laugh with a young man at the counter. Yet in the brief moments when she thought no one was looking, her shoulders sagged, and a distant weariness clouded her eyes. When Emily returned with his coffee, he thanked her with genuine warmth, his voice breaking through her automatic responses. "How's your night going?" he asked. She blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity of the question. "Busy," she replied after a pause, her practiced smile faltering slightly. "But it's all right. Just another day." Barron nodded, watching as she moved on to the next table, her practiced grace masking the weight she carried. Something about her struck a chord in him, and as he sipped his coffee, an idea began to form in his mind. When Emily returned with his coffee, he thanked her with genuine warmth, his voice breaking through her automatic responses. "How's your night going?" he asked. She blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity of the question. "Busy," she replied after a pause, her practiced smile faltering slightly. "But it's all right. Just another day." Barron nodded, watching as she moved on to the next table, her practiced grace masking the weight she carried. Something about her struck a chord in him, and as he sipped his coffee, an idea began to form in his mind. When Emily returned with his coffee, he thanked her with genuine warmth, his voice breaking through her automatic responses. "How's your night going?" he asked. She blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity of the question. "Busy," she replied after a pause, her practiced smile faltering slightly. "But it's all right, just another day." Barron nodded, watching as she moved on to the next table, her practiced grace masking the weight she carried. Something about her struck a chord in him, and as he sipped his coffee, an idea began to form in his mind. As Barron waited for his food, the steady rhythm of the diner seemed to slow in his mind. His eyes followed Emily as she moved from table to table, her interactions marked by a quiet grace that masked the strain she carried. He watched as she leaned slightly to hear the elderly couple's story, nodding at just the right moments, her smile never faltering. The couple seemed delighted by her attention, their laughter briefly filling the air. But as she stepped away from their table, Barron caught the way her shoulders dipped for just a moment, as if the weight of her day had momentarily slipped through her guard. A sudden cry from the corner booth pulled his attention back to her. A young mother sat holding her toddler, a puddle of spilled milk spreading across the table. The mother looked mortified, her apologies tumbling out in rapid succession. Emily was at the table in an instant, reassuring the woman with a kind smile. "Don't worry about it," she said, her tone warm and steady. "Happens all the time." She quickly grabbed a towel and cleaned the spill, her movements efficient yet gentle, ensuring the child's small fingers stayed clear of the mess. By the time she left the table, the mother was smiling again, her embarrassment replaced with relief. Barron found himself marveling at Emily's ability to handle these moments with such patience and empathy. But he couldn't ignore the small signs of weariness that slipped through. The way she paused for just a second longer behind the counter, massaging her wrist before grabbing the next tray, or the quick glance she gave the clock, as though silently willing the shift to end. She carried herself with resilience, but Barron could sense the cracks beneath her composed exterior. When she returned with his meal, Barron looked up and smiled. "Thank you," he said sincerely, his tone carrying more weight than the simple phrase might suggest. Emily hesitated for a moment, as though unsure how to respond to his genuine warmth. "You're welcome," she replied, her smile softening slightly. "How's your evening going?" Barron asked, his voice calm but curious. Emily blinked, surprised by the question. She had grown used to hurried orders and polite but distant exchanges. "Busy," she said after a brief pause, her practiced smile faltering just enough to show a flicker of vulnerability. "But it's all right. Just another day." Barron nodded, his gaze steady. "You're doing a great job," he said simply. For a moment, Emily froze, her eyes meeting his. She mumbled a quick, "Thank you," before turning to her next task, but Barron noticed the faint glimmer of emotion in her expression. As she walked away, Barron's thoughts lingered on her. He recognized the quiet strength she displayed, but also the invisible battles she seemed to carry. A small idea began forming in his mind, one that might bring her a moment of the kindness she so freely gave to others. As Barron finished his meal, he set his fork down and leaned back slightly, watching the quiet rhythm of the diner. Emily, still moving with practiced efficiency, balanced a tray as she cleared a nearby table, her smile polite but distant. Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen, unfolding the receipt she had left him. The idea that had been forming in his mind solidified into a simple, meaningful gesture. He wrote slowly, carefully choosing his words. It wasn't just about the money he intended to leave, though he knew the generous tip would help. It was about acknowledging Emily's efforts, her quiet resilience, and the way she brought warmth to the room despite her own evident struggles. His words filled the small space on the receipt. "Thank you for the kindness and care you show to everyone here. Your patience and warmth don't go unnoticed, even on the hardest days. You're stronger than you realize, and the light you bring to others is invaluable. Never forget that." Barron added a substantial tip alongside the note, folding the receipt neatly and placing it on the table. He adjusted the cash beneath it, ensuring it wouldn't be overlooked. As he glanced toward the counter, he saw Emily engrossed in her work, her back turned as she chatted briefly with another customer. It was the perfect moment to leave without drawing attention. He stood quietly, slipping his jacket over his shoulders and heading for the door. The bell jingled softly as he exited, and the brisk evening air greeted him. For a moment, he paused outside the diner, glancing back through the window. He could see Emily moving toward his table, her tray balanced in one hand. Barron smiled faintly, knowing that what he had left behind would speak louder than anything he could have said in person. Inside, Emily approached the table, her thoughts already on the next task. She picked up the empty plate and coffee cup, her eyes drifting to the folded receipt. Expecting a standard tip, she unfolded it quickly, but her hands froze as her eyes scanned the handwritten note. The words hit her like a gentle wave, their sincerity cutting through the walls she had built to keep herself moving through the long, hard days. Her breath caught as she noticed the generous tip tucked beneath the receipt. It wasn't just the amount. It was the thoughtfulness behind the gesture that left her momentarily speechless. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly turned away from the dining room to compose herself. Behind the counter, one of her coworkers noticed her reaction and leaned in. "Everything okay?" they asked softly. Emily nodded, her voice shaky but filled with emotion. "It's just, someone noticed. Someone really saw me," she whispered, clutching the note in her hand. As the realization sank in, her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She felt valued. As Emily stood behind the counter, the note still clutched in her hand, she felt a rush of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. The words on the paper echoed in her mind, their sincerity breaking through the heavy armor she wore every day. She had grown so used to her work being overlooked, to her efforts blending into the background of a busy diner, that the simple acknowledgement from a stranger felt overwhelming. Her coworker, Rachel, noticed Emily wiping at her eyes and approached cautiously. "Hey, you all right?" Rachel asked gently, her brow furrowing with concern. Emily nodded quickly, her voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, I'm okay," she managed, but the tremble in her words gave her away. She unfolded the receipt and handed it to Rachel without a word. Rachel scanned the note, her eyes widening as she read it. "Wow," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with awe. That's incredible." She looked at Emily, her expression softening. "You deserve this. You work harder than anyone here, and you never complain. It's about time someone saw that." Emily gave a small laugh, though it was choked with emotion. "I didn't think anyone noticed. Most days I feel like I'm just here, doing what I have to do, you know?" Rachel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Well, someone did notice, and they wanted you to know how much you matter. That's special." Emily nodded, her fingers brushing over the generous tip still tucked under the receipt. It wasn't just the money, though it would help immensely with the pile of bills waiting for her at home. It was the thought behind the gesture, the recognition that her efforts weren't invisible, that her kindness wasn't wasted. It gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: validation. For the rest of the evening, Emily moved through her shift with a renewed energy. The weight on her shoulders felt just a little lighter, and the quiet moments of loneliness that usually crept in were replaced by a warmth that stayed with her. She shared the story with a few regular customers as they finished their meals, her smile brighter than it had been in weeks. Their reactions mirrored her own: surprise, admiration, and a reminder of the power of small gestures. As the diner began to wind down for the night, Emily found herself reflecting on the stranger who had left the note. She didn't know his name or why he had chosen to write those words, but she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. It wasn't just about her. It was about the way he had taken the time to truly see her, to acknowledge her humanity in a world that often moved too fast to notice. That night, as she locked up the diner and walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, Emily felt a spark of hope she hadn't carried in a long time. One kind act, one thoughtful note, had reminded her of her worth, and she knew she wouldn't let that feeling go. Later that night, as Emily sat at her small kitchen table, the note and generous tip still resting beside her, she felt a wave of gratitude she couldn't contain. The simple yet powerful words written by the stranger kept replaying in her mind, filling her with a warmth she hadn't felt in months. After a moment of reflection, she picked up her phone and snapped a photo of the note, careful to frame it alongside the receipt that bore no name but carried so much meaning. With a deep breath, she opened her social media app and began typing. Her fingers hesitated briefly before she found the words. "Tonight, a stranger left me this note and reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that even in the hardest times, the kindness we show matters. To whoever you are, thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Your words mean more than you'll ever know." She posted the photo alongside her caption and set the phone down, not expecting much. The next morning, Emily woke to dozens of notifications lighting up her phone. Her post had struck a chord with people far beyond her small circle of friends. Comments poured in, each one sharing similar experiences of small gestures that had made a difference in their lives. Some thanked Emily for sharing her story, while others promised to pass on the kindness. By the afternoon, the post had been shared thousands of times, its reach expanding across platforms. Messages flooded in from strangers who were moved by her story. Some wrote about times when they had been on the receiving end of a kind gesture, while others described moments they wished they had shown more compassion to others. The overwhelming response reminded Emily that her experience wasn't just about her. It was a universal need to feel seen and valued. Inspired by the reaction, Emily decided to pay the kindness forward. At work, she began looking for small ways to brighten the days of her coworkers and customers. Whether it was an encouraging word, an extra cup of coffee for a regular who seemed down, or simply lending a listening ear, she made an effort to pass on the compassion she had received. Her renewed energy became contagious, lifting the atmosphere of the diner. Regular patrons noticed the change, and even her coworkers felt inspired to spread kindness in their own ways. Meanwhile, the story continued to ripple outward, touching countless lives. Local media picked it up, framing it as a reminder of the profound impact small acts of kindness can have. Community members began sharing their own stories of gratitude, and a subtle shift in the town's spirit became apparent. People were slower to judge, quicker to help, and more willing to acknowledge the unseen struggles others might be facing. For Barron, who saw glimpses of the story from afar, the impact of his gesture brought a quiet satisfaction.